This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Introduction. Antonia Susan Byatt, in the story The Thing in the Forest, interprets the well-known scenario of encountering the symbolic monster. The writer invites us to search how one can or should act when faced with mysterious supernatural beings that, in this case, represent deep psychological trauma. However, unlike the fairy tales and myths of the past that convey the importance of confronting one's fears, Byatt describes how the actions of encountering the latter may vary for different people. In this regard, the author tells the story of two girls, Penny and Primrose, who once saw the thing in the forest. Such an experience deeply traumatized both heroines and affected the rest of their lives. For instance, both failed to create families and chose professions related to children's development. However, at some point, the main characters decide to face the monster again to reassess their past experiences and move forward. For that reason, the current essay seeks to discuss the symbolism behind the monster story and analyze how Penny and Primrose understand and cope with the traumatic incident. The symbolism of the story. Since ancient times, human beings have personified the danger and unknown that they encounter. Many of the mythical stories that describe terrible creatures are still of great interest and importance to the modern audience. Although most of us do not believe in the existence of such beings, we consciously or unconsciously feel that they present some part of our reality as symbols. For instance, dragons, a very popular and common image in many cultures, represent the evil, chaos, and dangerous side of life. On the contrary, all the stories with monstrous figures also have heroes who confront the former. As a result of such conflict, protagonists gain something of high value, which often includes fame, respect from others, and material benefits. Therefore, the wisdom of ancestors, which is inherited through these stories, suggests that only by facing danger and chaos can one achieve something important. The thing that Penny and Primrose encountered symbolically represents the evil and pain associated with the human experience that revealed itself due to ongoing war. The fathers of both kids died during the military actions, and, although it is not mentioned directly, both girls could see other terrible images of warfare. Therefore, the monster that they encountered has many characteristics of modern civilization. For instance, the writer describes the thing as having trailed veils and prostheses of man-made materials, bits of wire netting, foul dishcloths, wire wool full of pan scrubbings, rusty nuts and bolts. Moreover, many features of the beast resembled dead bodies, such as the terrible odor of bad eggs, opaque white eyes, and the color of flayed flesh, pitted with wormholes. Therefore, it is not surprising that the shock that kids experienced stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Understanding of the experience. Both heroines equally understood that what they saw was something very inherent to human existence but did not reveal itself quite frequently, thus, most people are not even aware of it. In this regard, Penny says, "I think there are things that are real, more real than we are, but mostly we don't cross their paths, or they don't cross ours. Maybe at very bad times, we get into their world or notice what they are doing in ours." Indeed, before the 20th century, it was hard to believe that the terrible things that happened in the territories occupied by Nazi Germany or the Japanese Empire during World War II may even exist. For this reason, it is fair to claim that the shock that girls experienced facing the thing generalizes the experiences of many people who lived during that time. However, both Penny and Primrose understand that having the memory of tragedy poisons their lives. Thus, they sought to face the monster again to deal with their traumas. Dealing with trauma. Penny shows to the reader one of the possible ways of encountering the traumatic experience. The heroine works as a psychologist, and thus, it is fair to assume that she is used to countering the problem face to face. Therefore, Penny goes back to a similar place where she was as a kid and wants to confront the thing again with a professional gaze. However, Byatt does not describe whether the real meeting happened and, if yes, what was the consequence. Thus, the reader is left with the feeling that both tragic and happy outcomes are equally possible, which means that facing one's trauma directly may lead to salvation as well as death. On the other hand, Primrose is a talented storyteller and has a very developed imagination. She also goes back to the forest, but does not take the same route as when she was a child. As a result, she discovers the forest from a different angle with the beautiful flora and fauna. Therefore, Primrose counters her trauma by attempting to find beauty in life. Also, in comparison with Penny, the reader sees that Primrose's method of facing the traumatic experience is more reliable, as the latter is alive and happy in the end. Conclusion. In summary, the current essay analyzed the symbolism in the story The Thing in the Forest and, through these lenses, discussed how the two main heroines understood and coped with the experience of encountering the monster. It was found that the Thing personifies the terror and pain of war and, thus, facing it traumatized Penny and Primrose deeply. However, both women decided to deal with their traumas differently. The former addressed her problem using psychological analysis, while the latter coped with it with the help of imagination. If you want to find more works like this essay on symbolism in The Thing in the Forest story, head over to ivypanda.com. It has a collection of free samples with thousands of submissions covering virtually all academic subjects. No registration required to access it.